On the opening day of Morocco's group stage at this World Cup, something happened that had never happened before in the history of the competition. Morocco fielded an entire starting lineup in which every single player had been born outside Morocco, all 11, a first in World Cup history. They drew 1-1 with Brazil, five-time world champions, in New Jersey. The historic lineup detail barely made the headline. Morocco beat the Netherlands on penalties, then lost 2-0 to France in the quarterfinal. Their tournament was over. Their story was not, because the story of how Morocco built this squad is not really a story about this World Cup. It is a story about what happens when a country decides its diaspora is not an alternative to its football identity, but part of it. Of the 26 players Morocco named for this tournament, 19 were born outside Morocco. That number was itself higher than in 2022, when Morocco reached the World Cup semi-final for the first time in African football history. That squad had 14 born outside the country. The number has moved in one direction across each recent tournament, and yet Morocco keeps advancing further than the previous edition.
This episode is about what that pattern means and why it is more complicated than it might first appear.
Starting with what it actually feels like from the inside to be one of the 19. Many of Morocco's players grew up in France, Spain, Belgium, and the Netherlands, in cities far from Casablanca and Rabat. They were schooled in European football academies. They competed in European leagues. Several were capped at youth level by the countries where they were born and raised. And then at some point they chose Morocco. For some, that choice was always clear. They had grown up in families where Morocco was the team their parents and grandparents watched, regardless of what passport they carried. For others, the choice came later, sometimes after years of waiting to see if a European nation would call. Some switched after being told, formally or informally, that there was no path to the senior squad where they had grown up. FIFA's rules allow players to switch international association under specific conditions, primarily before the age of 21 and with limited prior senior appearances. Morocco's federation actively engaged with this framework, identifying talented players of Moroccan heritage in European academies and maintaining contact over years. The approach was not passive. Morocco did not wait for diaspora players to discover their heritage. The federation went looking, built relationships, and made the case. Of the 54 diaspora players assessed across the period from 2017 to 2026, roughly half came to Morocco, having always been aligned with the federation. The other half had previously been involved in youth setups elsewhere before eventually switching to Morocco. The split between the two routes is almost even. That split matters because it complicates the story people sometimes tell, that Morocco is simply taking players that European nations missed or rejected. The reality is more layered. Some players chose Morocco early and never wavered. Others waited, were passed over, and then chose. Both paths arrived at the same squad. And both paths reflect something real about identity that football governance has historically struggled to contain within neat categories. A player can have grown up in France, support Paris Saint-Germain, speak French at home, and still experience Morocco as the team that represents something essential about who they are. Layered belonging is the phrase academic researchers use for this. It describes a situation where identity is not singular, not a zero-sum choice, but multiple and simultaneous. It is a concept that football's governing structures have difficulty processing. FIFA's eligibility rules are designed around choices. You represent one country or another. The players, however, do not always experience it as a choice in that binary sense. They experience it as a question of which part of their identity gets to be primary at a given moment. For many of Morocco's foreign-born players, choosing to represent Morocco was not a rejection of France or Spain or Belgium. It was an affirmation of something that existed alongside all of that. That distinction matters because how you frame it changes what the model looks like.
If you frame it as rejection, Morocco's model looks like a talent extraction strategy, drawing players away from the countries that develop them.
If you frame it as affirmation, Morocco's model looks like a reconnection strategy, re-engaging a diaspora that was always emotionally connected to a place its members may never have lived. Both framings describe the same facts. Both miss something the other captures.
What neither framing fully captures is the institutional effort required to make this model work at scale.
Morocco's federation does not simply post an invitation and wait. It employs scouts, maintains relationships with diaspora communities, and tracks eligible players from a young age. The country went one round further in 2022 and reached this quarterfinal without Ezel Zuli and Aguerd, two of their most significant players who withdrew injured before the tournament began. Reaching the quarterfinal without two of your most important players suggests that the squad depth built through diaspora recruitment is genuine, not illusory. The domestic league also contributes. Two of the squad's goalkeepers play in Morocco itself, ensuring the local system is not entirely bypassed.
The federation's stated direction is increasingly integrated, diaspora players complementing domestic pathways, not replacing them.
Whether that integration is genuine or aspirational is a question the data across the next two World Cups will answer more clearly than this one. For now, the evidence from 2022 and 2026 suggests a model that works at tournament level, whatever its internal tensions. France is the largest single source of Morocco's diaspora players, contributing more than any other European country across the period studied. That creates an interesting dynamic. France ended Morocco's run in the 2022 semifinal and ended it again in the 2026 quarterfinal. In both matches, some of Morocco's players were competing against the country that developed them. In the 2026 quarterfinal, a player who had previously been in French youth setups was asked about it afterward. He said he had no regrets about choosing Morocco. The game, he said, was just a game. The identity was deeper than any single result. That answer is, in its own way, a more sophisticated account of diaspora identity than most political debates about migration and belonging tend to offer.
It also raises a question that is genuinely unresolved in football governance. As diaspora recruitment becomes more common across more national federations, what are the rules managing it designed to protect?
Several federations at this World Cup use dual national recruitment strategies. Morocco's is the most visible because their results made it visible. The model is not unique to Africa or to Morocco. It is a structural feature of modern international football, where migration patterns and football development no longer map neatly onto national borders. What Morocco has done is operationalize it more deliberately and at greater scale than most. The result, across two consecutive tournaments, is a quarterfinal and a semifinal, results that no African nation had achieved consecutively before. So what does Morocco's model mean for African football more broadly? The expanded World Cup format, with 9 African teams instead of 5, gave the continent more matches and more visibility at this tournament. Morocco were the only African team to reach the knockout rounds from outside the group stage. The others did not replicate their run. That gap between Morocco's model and the rest of African football's performance at this tournament is itself a data point worth sitting with. Morocco's approach requires infrastructure, budget, and sustained institutional commitment. It is not a template that every federation can copy at will. What it does demonstrate is that a route exists for African football to compete consistently at quarterfinal level and beyond. The route is not easy, but it is documented. The debate within African football about diaspora recruitment is real and ongoing. Some critics argue it displaces domestic talent, discourages investment in local infrastructure, and creates squads that are emotionally ambiguous rather than genuinely rooted. Some of those concerns are valid. A federation that recruits diaspora players instead of developing domestic ones is building on borrowed infrastructure it did not create. Morocco's stated response is integration. The diaspora as complement, not replacement. Whether the domestic system is genuinely developing alongside the diaspora recruitment is a question the next cycle will make clearer. What this tournament confirmed is that the output, at the moment, works. A knockout run with 2 key players missing past a strong Netherlands side, then a competitive quarterfinal against a France team that reached the semi-final. For the players themselves, the result of the France match does not change what the tournament meant. They played, they competed. Several of them played against the country that trained them, for the country that called to them. That experience is not diminished by the scoreline. Losing 2-0 to France is not a failure for a squad that entered without 2 of its most important players. The 2022 semi-final, the 2026 quarterfinal, 2 editions of the tournament, 2 deep runs, a consistent record that was not consistent before 2022. That trajectory is the story. Not any single match, not any single player's eligibility, not any single debate about identity and belonging. Football has always been a sport that traveled with people. Where people moved, they brought the game. What Morocco has done is recognize that movement as a resource rather than a complication and build a squad out of it. Whether that is the future of international football or one model among several depends on questions that go beyond any single federation's choices. For now, 19 players born outside Morocco played for Morocco at this World Cup. One of them scored. Several of them were outstanding. All of them chose, and that choice, made by 19 people across multiple decades of migration and football development, produced one of the most interesting squads this tournament has seen. The game continues, Morocco are going home, but the model they represent is not going anywhere. And somewhere in a youth academy in France, or Spain, or Belgium, a player with Moroccan heritage is deciding which part of themselves gets to be primary on the pitch. That decision, repeated across enough players and enough years, is what this team was built from. The model is imperfect. The tensions within it are real. The debate about domestic development versus diaspora recruitment did not end when the tournament did. The results over 2 consecutive tournaments suggest that Morocco has found something that works at this stage of their development better than anything they had before. For African football, that is worth understanding, not as a template to copy, but as a case study in what institutional ambition and consistent execution can produce over time. The game continues. Morocco are going home, but the model they represent is not going anywhere.